Welcome to Animator Tech. This is your host, Terry Kalinich, and I'm delighted to have a very special guest on this podcast. This is episode 4, and I would like to say, though, before we actually start this interview, I'd like to mention that the format in the future from this point on for this podcast is I might have certain moments on the screen. There'll be imagery that is complementing whatever the subject matter is. I have some old footage of things that I've drawn before, both in a training and in a professional manner, so I may take those opportunities to put that on the screen. And likewise for my guests, if they have something that they can if they would like to have shown on the podcast, I will also include that. So that's something that you may see coming up throughout the podcast as we talk. So this first guest of mine, I'll just mention his name. I'll blow that cover right now because I gave so much suspense in my earlier podcasts. His name is Willy Ashworth. This person is very, very special to me, and you'll discover that through the duration of this as to why. So, without further ado, Willy, please introduce yourself, and also at any time you can go right into how you got into the industry.
All right. Hey, Terry, how you doing? How are things in Vancouver?
Very good. Good. Thank you very much.
Good. Well, we're here in Toronto, in High Park in Toronto. Yeah, I'm Willy Ashworth. I'm a retired animator, a traditional animator for about 30, almost 40 years in the Toronto industry. I think I'm ready to be interrogated.
Yes.
but before we do that, I thought I'd just go back into the past and lead up to how I first got interested in animation, because I think it's an interesting journey.
Absolutely.
I was very lucky as a kid growing up. I had a grandfather who worked in a paper mill, and he was always bringing me home reams of paper to draw on, all sorts of sizes, and so I always had paper to draw on. It was a constant in my life, and I think it started very, very early. Around that same time, my parents got me a subscription to a magazine called Humpty Dumpty magazine, which was in the 50s was a little booklet for kids, and had stories and games and puzzles and stuff. But it also had great illustrations from the 40s and 50s, that golden age of illustration. Kind of like Golden Book illustrations, if you know that kind of very graphic, watercolor sort of stuff. Just really that had a huge influence on me.
Okay. And
then not only that, but there was also all the comic books I would get, and I read them all. And a very typical past for a young animator. Someone's going to be an animator growing up. Big influences, but probably the biggest influence I think was probably early morning TV, especially Saturday mornings. In those days, I don't recall that there was a lot of cartoons in the morning during the week, but the big deal was Saturday morning cartoons, where you would get up at 6 in the morning with your bowl of cereal and slap on the local station, which in my case was Buffalo. I grew up in St. Catharines, Ontario.
Yeah, I did that as well. The morning.
So big bowl of puffed rice or puffed wheat, and watch cartoons all morning. And those cartoons, a huge influence on my life. They were like Golden Age Warner Brothers and Fleischer, Popeyes, Betty Boops, that sort of thing. Right. But there's also Farmer Alfalfa and Heckle and Jekyll, the Terry Toon stuff. So that stuff was really, really big in my world. I just loved all that stuff. And then also in the 50s was the time of stop motion animation was pretty big in films too. So I used to go when I was 5 or 6 years old. I used to go to the Tivoli Theater in Thorold. Anytime there was a Ray Harryhausen film on, and I used to love those too. I think at that age I had no idea how they were done. I just kind of got absorbed in the magic, and to this day I still love a stop motion. I've never done it. I've done a little tests with crappy cameras and stuff, but I've never done anything of note. But had a big influence on me. I've always said that hand-drawn animation and stop motion animation, you really see the hand of the animator in it. A lot, and I really like that. It's something very magical. All that George Pal stuff, if you know George Pal, did a lot of stuff for movies. Yeah, check out George Pal, and he did a lot of stop motion stuff. Came up with a lot of techniques that are kind of used today in stop motion.
Oh, cool.
Removable faces and stuff like that. Anyway, maybe you can throw some of that George Pal stuff up later on when we insert images here. Anyway, so that was a big influence. Of course, Mad Magazine was huge. Twilight Zone later in the late 50s, when I think Twilight Zone started in 59. I think I would have been 10, so that was a big influence. The Superman TV show was great. I love that. That was a must-watch. I think so. That takes me up to about the time I was 10 years old, and I was, as I say, drawing all the time. My grandparents were both really good. As I said, my grandfather, working in the paper mill, always gave me lots of paper. My grandmother always made sure I had art books and pens and pencils and how-to books and stuff like that. I remember she bought me a set of oils when I was about 14 years old, which was a little bit later. But I was very lucky to have supportive grandparents who really, my grandmother really believed in me. She really thought that I was going to become something as an artist. Great. So that takes us up into the 60s. So we go up into the 60s. My grandmother, I mentioned, was always trying to help me. When I was in high school, there was no art courses in high school. I went to Thorold High, and there was no, at that time, there may be now, but there were no art courses at all. I mean, you couldn't take any, the closest they had was like, drawing car parts and stuff like that kind of stuff, and I just didn't want to do that. So my grandmother, who lived in St. Catharines proper, found out that one of the high schools in St. Catharines had an art course. I think it was St. Catharines Collegiate. So she tried. She said, "Well, why don't you go there?" And we discovered that I couldn't go there. I wasn't allowed to because they were in two different counties. That was I was in Welland County, and the high school of the art course in St. Catharines was in another county. Wow. And I could. So they said, we can't. That's not allowed. So my grandmother said, well, my grandmother's like, well, she said, well, what if I adopted my grandson? She was always thinking, and he can come live with me on Queenston Street, and he can walk to school, and then the school board wouldn't have it. You can't take a boy out of his home, that kind of thing. So as a result, I didn't get any training. But right around that time, a sort of magical thing happened. I was sitting on my front porch in the summer. And a moving van was coming up the street, and the house next to us was empty. And this guy got out, and he was a tall guy. He was wearing a beret. He had a little tiny beard, and he turned out to be an artist. And he was a teacher, a life drawing teacher, and an artist and a painter. So if I thought about it, I could think of his name. It'll probably come to me as we're going along, but he was great. That's the first place I learned about the grades of pencils, like HB to 8B and 2H and all that stuff. And he would give me supplies. I remember he gave me a little pencil sharpener, and he gave me a bunch of pencils, and he was always looking at my drawings. So I had a really good. That's my first kind of taste of training, I guess, or someone who knew artwork. But here's a funny story. These were different times. They moved in when I was about 10 or 11, I guess. So that would have been around 1960, 59, 60, something like that.
Yeah.
Now, I think his name was Frank. Now, Frank used to life draw his wife.
Oh.
I didn't know. I mean, I never saw him do that, of course, but his wife was a model.
Yeah.
And a life drawing model, and he used to life draw his wife, with Conte on manila paper and stuff like that.
Totally.
And then he would, like a lot of artists, would only keep the good ones, and he'd throw the other ones away. Well, one day, he threw a bunch of drawings in a garbage can. There was a big windstorm. And the windstorm blew these beautiful renderings of his wife all over the neighborhood. And the story goes, I don't know if this is true, but one of the drawings blew across the street. It's like a movie. It's like a Coen Brothers movie or something. And it landed on the window facing into the family that was having dinner. And they knew who he was because he was a really good artist.
Oh, man.
And the sad story is, I don't know if it's related, but about 3 months later he moved out.
Oh.
Now, to this day, I don't know if he got ostracized from the neighborhood or whatever. But all of a sudden, I didn't have an art teacher anymore. So up until the time I went to Sheridan, that was pretty much the only art training or any kind of help I had with my art.
Wow.
So there, it was when I finally went to Sheridan. It was like which was 1969. I got to tell you that story too. 1969, the year of 68, 69. I had finished. I was out of high school, and I only went to grade 10 because there was just nothing for me in high school.
Wow.
And these were back in the days. When a lot of people left high school to work because they had to help their families and stuff. That wasn't my case, but it was easy to leave. At 16, I think I left when I was 17 or 18.
Okay.
And I went to work, and I wanted to work, and I wanted to get into art somehow. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I just knew I had to save my money, save my money, and either get some lessons or whatever. But that was my plan. As weak as it was, that was my plan.
But was the art was it specific, or was it just something artistic at that time?
I just wanted to do anything artistic.
Right.
At that time, I wasn't thinking animation.
Okay.
Animation was like going to the moon for me. I just had I don't know if you remember, but there were occasionally on the Woody Woodpecker show. Do you remember? I don't know if you ever saw it, but they would show the cartoons. This is the early one, and they would have Woody animated over live action of Walter Lantz, the creator of Woody Woodpecker, and Meet My Boss, Walter Lantz. Remember that? And he would show, Walter Lantz would show you how to draw. That was the first time I heard circles and spines, and the first time I heard about that. So I would draw that. So I had that going, and occasionally on the Disney TV show, they would show behind the stages stuff with animators. Yeah. Frank and Ollie drawing.
Oh yeah.
But as I said, that stuff was totally moonshot for me. That's not for me. I can't. What? But I loved illustration and as I say, Mad magazines and the Golden books, and I wanted to illustrate. I wanted to draw. That's all. So that was the plan.
Okay.
Just to draw, and go somewhere and be taught. I wanted to find a mentor or somebody who could teach me how to be better. That was my goal.
Right.
So the year before I actually went to Sheridan, in 1968, I didn't have a job. My cousin came to visit, and cousin Doug, and he said, "Hey, listen, there's a lot of you should come back to Paris." That's where he grew up. That's where my dad grew up. My grandfather lived there. He said, "You ought to come back to Paris, and you can get a job at Penmans. They need people there." And Penmans made socks and underwear and material for the lining of gloves and that kind of thing, car interiors, that kind of stuff. So it was a textile mill. Right. So I said, okay, I got nothing to lose. I mean, I wasn't working. I got in the car when Doug left, and we drove to Paris. I told my grandfather, hey, I'm going to try and get a job at Paris. And he goes, well, at Penmans here in Paris. And he says, well, if you do, you can live here. I said, okay. And that's what happened. I went down to the mill. I got a job. And for a year, I worked at Penmans, and I saved up my money. But I still didn't know what I was going to do. I still didn't know what I was going to do. Meanwhile, I'm working in a textile mill.
Yeah.
My job was to take these big bales of rolled material that were on these round cores, on these little dollies, and then take them. They were about, I don't know, 3 feet high, 4 feet. They probably weighed a couple hundred pounds.
Right.
And very, very heavy, very tightly wound material. And my job was to take them through the factory, down the elevators to another part of the factory where they were to be washed. Right. And I would give them to the washer. But here's the thing: you had to put the thread count on these cards that were about 4 by 5 inches, I guess, 4 by 5. They were white cards, and you had these black markers.
Right.
So when you know what's coming.
Yes.
So you had to put down, like, the thread count might be 48, 36, and then the wash would be, the guy who would do the wash would know how to wash them. That certain washes had blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so he had to impart this information.
Yeah.
So long story short, while I was waiting for stuff to come off the machines, I often had 20 minutes, half an hour waiting for stuff to come off the machine. So I would draw on these cards, and I would just fill up. And my boss at the time was a guy named Les Graham, a great guy. He'll figure in this story later. And he said, you're wasting your time here. He says, look at this flower you drew. That's great. Look at this. You drew a shoe. Did you draw this shoe? Holy cow, you're wasting your time working here. And so this went on for about a year. But I collected all these things.
Okay.
And then I had my summer vacation, and I had a week off. So I went back to St. Catharines, Thorold area. I grew up in Thorold, actually, Thorold South. And I went back to my old high school just to talk to my guidance counselor. And I remember his name was Mike Yednaraz. And it's funny I would remember that name.
Yeah.
And this is why I remember his name. So he said, you quit high school, eh? And I says, yeah, well, I'm thinking maybe going back to school and maybe going to university. He goes, well, you've been working for a year almost now. He said, because you can go to a community college as a mature student. And I said, well, how will I pay for it? And he said, well, you can get a loan. And a loan and a grant. Depending on your parents' income, you'll get a certain amount of money.
Right.
So that's what they were doing in those days. I don't know if they still do that. But so I said, well, that sounds pretty good. I said, well, what am I going to, I said, what's a community college? And he goes, well, and then he reached over the side of his desk, and he had this wall filled with racks full of these little pamphlets for universities and colleges. So he went to the college section, community college section, grabbed a handful, maybe 8 of them, and put them on his desk, and he fanned them out like a card player, like a Mississippi card player. And they're all fanned out. And right in the middle was the one from Sheridan College. Oh. And it slipped right out in front. It was like a movie. And I said, animation. You can be an animator. That's what it said. You can be an animator. I said, I can. And so I looked at it, and I read it, and I said, okay, that's for me.
Wow.
So I applied to Sheridan. Now, this was August of that year.
Okay.
School was starting in September. Okay. So I was applying pretty late. What am I going to send? I wrote a letter, got a letter back. They told me what they needed. I sent them, they wanted 10 drawings. All they asked for was 10 drawings. And that's all. That's all they asked for. They're quite different now from what I understand. Yeah. So 10 drawings. Yeah, I'm sure it's much heavier now. I know it's much heavier now. So 10 drawings. Of course, I sent those drawings from work. Those little 4 by 5 cards. Okay. So I got a manila envelope and put them in the envelope and with a letter, and then I mailed it. But I also put in, my grandfather would always wear these white shirts, and he would take them to the dry cleaners. And those days, you would get your shirt all cleaned with these white card backings, and they were about like 8 by 10. And he had a stack of those, so I sent about 10 of those too. So I sent actually 20 drawings. Okay. All with big fat marker, just drawings. Oh. That was my portfolio. Okay. I don't know whatever happened to it. I'd love to see it now. I'm sure they were awful, but so I waited. I went to work every day, and I didn't get. So September comes, and the school is, I think, supposed to start something like maybe the 12th, say the 12th of September.
Yeah.
Still nothing. This is now the 14th of December. I come home from work at lunch, and there's a letter for me telling me I've been accepted.
Wow.
And I went over the moon. I couldn't believe it. Nobody in my family's ever gone to college, never mind university or whatever. And I was the first one in my family, so I was thrilled.
Yeah.
But here it is. The school's already started. I've already missed 2 days.
Right.
I had no place to stay. I didn't know what I was going to do. So I phoned a college and told them I was coming, but I couldn't come till Monday because I wanted to give my 2 weeks' notice. I went to talk to my boss, Les Graham, who I mentioned earlier. He said, "What are you doing here? You're wasting our time here." That guy. Yeah. And I told him, I said, "Hey, Les, guess what? I got accepted at Sheridan College. I'm going to go study animation." And he was just over the moon. I said, "But I want to give my 2 weeks' notice." He goes, and this was Wednesday. He goes, "You know what?" He said, leave Friday. Friday's your last day. You don't need, I can find somebody to fill your place. Not a problem. You go to school. So that was great. So I had that covered, but also I had no money.
Yes.
I mean, I had saved about $250 from my work.
Right.
And I had this tape recorder, this reel-to-reel tape recorder that I sold just before I went. So that gave me I sold that for a couple $100. I had $400 to take with me.
Wow.
And I found out that my loan wasn't going to happen until, I wasn't going to get it to probably December.
Wow.
So I had about $400 to live on.
Oh boy.
Before I went there. But before that even happened, how am I going to get there? I don't drive. I don't have a car.
Right.
So my Uncle Stan, who lived in Paris, he came to the rescue, and he said, "Where's the school?" I said, "It's in Brampton." It was in Brampton in those days.
Oh.
And the first year, before they moved to Oakville, Sheridan was in Brampton. It was in high school. So he said, "Well, listen, I know a guy. You have a place to live here?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, I know a guy who lives there, and on Monday I can drive you there. I can introduce you to him, and we went up on the Sunday, the day before. I can introduce you to him, and maybe he'll know a place." So everything was falling into place. I couldn't believe it. My Uncle Stan, one of the kindest guys in the world, took me up there, and he took me to a hotel, and because I was going to have to stay overnight, and I remember he put $20 in my shirt pocket, and said, "This could probably feed you for the week." So that was a kindness.
Right.
And so this guy ended up having a place to stay, but he lived about 1.5 miles from the school, and I didn't want to either walk 1.5 miles to the school every day, and I wanted to be as close to the school as possible because I was just so anxious to learn. I didn't want to waste any time. I wanted to be close. Yeah. So I ended up getting a place about 2 or 3 blocks from the school, and I could walk to the school every day.
Yeah.
And my first day was the Monday, and I walked up the steps. I remember this clearly, Terry. I walked up the steps, and I opened the door, and it was like a high school. It was very much like my high school in Thorold. And there's a big bulletin board at the top of the steps inside, and there was a big poster there for the animation course. And it said, "You can be an animator," much like the folder I saw in Mike Yedneraz's office.
Yeah.
And I thought my heart was pounding, right? And I knew I was told to go to the office, but before I went to the office, I read this thing. It said, "You can be an animator. At the end of the second year, you will have completed your own animated film." Wow. And I was sweating, and I thought, I don't know how to do that. And I said, "I can't do this." And I turned around, I walked out. I said, "I can't do this. This is not." Wow. And I was halfway down the steps, and I realized, "You idiot! That's why you're here. You're here to learn how to do this."
Oh man!
So this is 1969, fall of 1969. So I went, and I was there for 2 years in the animation course. Yeah. I'll never forget the first time I stepped into my art history class with a cup of coffee in the morning, and this great teacher with these slides with all this great artwork that I'd never seen before, I knew nothing about. It blew my mind. I thought, wait a minute, I can sit here, and the government's going to pay me to go to school, and give me a loan so I can go to school.
Yeah.
And I can sit here with my coffee and just look at art for 3 hours. I thought I was in heaven and talk about art. And it was great. It was fantastic. It was mind-blowing.
Yeah.
The downside of all of it was that because I had very little training,
Yes.
pretty much everybody that I was in that class with, I would say half of them, were way better than me. Way, way better. They could already draw. They'd already done a little bit of animation.
Okay.
They'd done some illustration. There was a few people there who became really good friends, who actually, there were 4 or 5 of us that went on to work at Nelvana and working on Rock and Rule, but that's much in the future.
Yeah.
But so it's probably no surprise that about 2 weeks after I was there, that all the guys that I mentioned, or I would consider the real keeners in this class, all got together and rented a house.
Well, oh.
So I had a place to I had a place to live. You know,
That's
first
great.
we rent in Brampton we rented a townhouse.
Right.
And then about 3/4 of the way through the year, I think just before, maybe a couple months before school ended first year, the school moved from Brampton to Oakville for the opening. But we were still living in Oakville, so they used to bus us in every day, and we still had some classes in the other school. It was a gradual thing, but going to the new school was great. It was spanking brand new then.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking going into the drive, it kind of looked like a dinosaur, you know, with those sharp windows on the top. I don't know if you remember that or not, but it looked very designy. I thought, oh, this is like a movie or something.
Right.
So so I did that for 2 years.
Right.
And the course, and then so graduated from second year. So I decided to stay back. Another friend of mine, Dale Cummings, he and I stayed back and for third year and did a course in illustration. And at that point, it wasn't a diploma course; it was just a course.
Right.
So, but I got it. I think I got a certificate. I got a diploma for graduating animation.
Okay.
But not for that. So that takes us to about 73, 72. I graduated, something like that.
Okay.
So I should mention too. I always tell. I've done a bit of teaching, and I go out to Sheridan. I have friends who teach out there, and I like talking to students. And I always tell them have any idea what my tuition was? I came to Sheridan in 1969. Do you know what my tuition was in 1969? And I say they have no idea. And I say, well, my tuition, and I had a hard time scraping the money to get it together, was $175.
Yeah.
For the year.
Yeah.
$175. And what's it now, Terry? Do you have any idea?
Oh, it's easily over tens of thousands now, because even for me,
what was it when you were there?
It was only $1,500 for 1 year. So
$1,500.
So then it would have been like 3 or,
right,
just over.
So that was you paid that yearly, right?
Yeah.
You paid that, yeah.
So
that's interesting.
So back then,
really
that to me was breaking the bank, like. From
Oh, it was for me too. The 175. Yeah. That's why I had to sell my tape recorder.
Yeah.
Because that paid for my tuition. I sold that before I even went, so I could just pay the tuition. So, also too, the other thing I remember from those days was because I had no little money, I ate a lot of craft dinner.
Yeah.
If you bought a box of it, like I remember going to the local grocery store, whatever it was. And I remember saying to the guy, I said, look, these things are 23 cents a box. I said, I'm trying to save some money. If I bought a case from you, would you sell me a case? And the guy wasn't going to do it at first, but he eventually did. So I was buying craft dinner by the cases. So it worked out to like 18 cents a box or something, which was a little bit cheaper. I was trying to save some money. So,
one thing I'll mention, though, is like I was a little more... more shy, and I wasn't comfortable with the idea of renting a place with a bunch of animators or a bunch of students that I just don't know. So for me, that was a terrifying idea, and even if it came across my path, which it didn't, I would have been very hesitant to do it. And it would have been a mistake if I said no, but I'm just saying, like, personality-wise, I was really shy,
Right.
you know, and
I get that. I used to be that way, but back when I was like early teenage years.
yeah.
But I played in bands, and there was something about getting on stage and playing music. I was kind of insecure in those days, but playing music and getting on stage, I think got that out of me. And I think the reason why the house worked, I think there were 6 or 7 of us.
Yeah.
It was a big house, and I think the reason it worked was I think we decided to do it about 3 or 4 weeks after knowing each other. Everyone was in different places living, and we weren't happy with our living conditions.
Right.
And we'd sit at lunch and we'd say, why don't we all live together and save money? It was also a cost thing too. We thought we could save some money, which we did.
Yep.
And the other thing was, it was really apparent that these guys were the talents of the. I was happy to be among that bunch. I was probably the lesser, quite frankly, the lesser of the talents. Some of the drawing skills. I had never done life drawing before, and a lot of these people had done life drawing before, and I had never done it. So that was another mind-blowing thing, was life drawing. But it was very apparent that these guys were the guys that were going to finish the course and get into the business. The other people were very nice, but I got to say that this class was really split down the middle.
Okay.
There were half that didn't get into animation at all and actually quit before second year.
Yes.
And then the other guys stayed, and the other guys were. I'll tell the second half of this later on, or whatever. I'll tell you, mention some of the names of the people that I worked with or went to school with there, went on to do great things.
This concludes our portion of this interview with Willy Ashworth. Please join us next episode for the continuation. Thank you very much for your time.